Hi everyone, and welcome to another A Healthy New Zealand podcast. And today I'm really excited to have Tracey McBeath here with me. So Tracey's from Melbourne, and I've been wanting to do this podcast with her for such a long time, and we've finally connected. So thanks for coming along, Tracey.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for asking me, Susan. It's lovely to finally meet you like we meet people these days on Zoom.
I know. I do think that one of the benefits of COVID has been being able to reach out and build more of this kind of international connection with people, which I think sometimes prior to COVID, you were sort of locked in your own little space quite a bit. So I have really enjoyed that and finding so many like-minded people.
I agree. Yep.
So Tracey is a health coach, and she has a whole lot of skills to her bow, which I'd like to talk about this afternoon. But can we start off by just you sharing your story with us and how you got into health coaching? And I know you've got a bit of your own health journey, so we'd love to hear about that.
Okay, so just tell me when to stop. I'll start from not the beginning, but yes, I'm a health coach in Melbourne. I am a mum of 5. I never planned to have 5 children. Everyone goes, you've got 5 kids. And I go, I've got 5 kids. I still don't believe it. But I had 3 beautiful children, and my first marriage didn't make it. And then I remarried, and my husband and I now have two kids. I've got 4 boys and 1 girl. From 19 down to my youngest is 6. So they're all at school now, except my eldest, who's finished and he's off exploring Australia and currently in Jabiru working up there. So I'm very busy with my children, which is fantastic. So my journey took me from Sydney to Melbourne. I moved to Melbourne when I was 30. So I did actually grow up in Sydney, and I was working before children in a human resources bank in the area of Macquarie Bank. It was very different HR back then. It was all sort of in-house, and I had done a teaching degree at university. I always loved sort of being with people and helping people, I guess, sort of learn things. And I did that degree, and I can't really remember how I landed this job in HR, but it was in learning and development. So it was all around helping managers become better people managers, if you like. And yeah, so that was really good. I really enjoyed it. But then I got pregnant and we moved to Melbourne, and I spent, probably 8 years as a stay-at-home mum. And, I really enjoyed that. I didn't really miss work during that time. I had no family around here, so I was very busy, and my ex-husband is a doctor and he worked long hours, so I was home a lot with the kids, but that was all good. And anyway, around the time that my marriage sort of started to fall away for one reason or another, I felt it was time to look outside and to do something else. And I dabbled with a few things. I actually became an extra. I love telling people this. I did extras work for a while. So I was on Neighbours and a few different TV, Australian dramas. A lot of them are shot in Melbourne, and did a few ads and stuff. And that was fun, but it was really challenging in that, they would call you up the night before and say you had to be on the other side of Melbourne at 6 a.m. and have all this stuff. And of course, organising people to look after the children when they were quite little was quite challenging. So I left that. And at that time, I'd love to say I was always into fitness, but I wasn't. I was pretty lazy. I think I always was concerned about my weight, like most women sort of are. Like during my 20s, I did the whole low fat thing and dieted a lot. And but by the time I'd had my first child, I actually was in Melbourne, and I realized a great way to meet people was to join a local running group. There was a group called Step Into Life that operate out of Australia. They're like little franchises, and I don't know how it happened, but I ended up joining one of those groups and made a lot of friends and found running. And really, really loved it. It became my escape, the time where I could put my earphones in and go, and no little kids or anyone could talk to me. I just loved it. And I ended up becoming very passionate about running and decided to become a personal trainer. So did all that and yeah, started working. But I kind of worked in gyms and had to manage things around my children. And, you know, it was fantastic actually doing that. You know, when I was on my own for a couple of years as a single mum, which was quite challenging. But, you know, I look back now on that as being just one of the most amazing times of my life where I did learn a lot and was forced to look at a lot. But having that work was really great, not easy again, managing it around a family, because a lot of personal training work was early morning or late after work. And it's just generally not a lot during the day. So it worked for a long time in and around, you know, my life and my children. But interestingly, around the time I turned, gosh, it was probably 39, 40, and I'd had my fourth child. And I just couldn't lose the weight. And, I was starting to think that, I was doing something wrong, even though I was doing nothing different. And maybe I just had to exercise more, or had to just cut the fat more. And I tried all that, tried cutting my calories and doing all the things that we think are the things we need to do when we need to lose weight. And it wasn't working. So I ended up, I think the first sort of foray into this sort of alternative way of eating real food was through David Gillespie. Actually, a client of mine told me about the book Sweet Poison that he'd written. And I'm like, really? Yeah. Really? Sugar fuels your brain and your muscles, and we need sugar for energy. But of course, after I read that book, I was like, whoa. Had the whole, what am I doing? What am I feeding my children, with their oats and banana and low-fat yogurt and orange juice and sultanas, and oh my goodness, had to go through all that. Okay, and then I recovered and thought, all right, there's definitely something in that. So I took sugar out of my diet and my children's diet as best I could, gradually and bit by bit. They were still, gosh, I can't remember now. They were still pretty young. So that wasn't as hard as if it would be now as teenagers. But I did that. And, that was good. That was kind of for about a year. I definitely noticed a difference for about a year. But it didn't, I don't know, it still felt like there was something missing. And I actually had gone to find a low carb lifestyle GP. I didn't really know low carb then, but inadvertently had come across a doctor called Dr. Z, who works out of Melbourne. And I went and had some blood tests done, and it came back that my HbA1c was pretty high, and I was on the path to type 2 diabetes, even though I didn't get that diagnosis. I was definitely on the path there, and, signs of fatty liver, all that sort of stuff, all the classic signs that, I was insulin resistant. So I'm like, right, I have to find out what's going on. And interestingly, my husband, my now husband, who's actually 10 years older than me, he started having a very similar health scenario. He was a martial artist, always into fitness and training, but his diet, I suppose his health started to do similar things at the same sort of time. So we both jumped head on into this. And, we found Professor Tim Noakes, and we haven't looked back. That was, well, I'm nearly 48 now. So this has all sort of been over the last 8 years that I've just completely, changed the way I eat, the way my family eat, my view of nutrition, my view of it being, all about calories and fat, and, it's just flipped everything. Oh, and of course the sugar, needing that for energy, flipping that all on its head. But it was interesting because I was working in the personal training space, and we are under the Fitness Australia guidelines, we're told categorically that we were not allowed to share dietary information that fell outside the dietary guidelines. And particularly, they were very specific around their fad recommendations of a low carb, not to talk about low carb or ketogenic diets or anything like that. Vegan was fine, but not low carb. So I started to struggle with that. And I decided to start my own sort of boutique gym at home, and I set it up at home, and, you know, that kind of worked well. And, you know, I was doing that for a couple of years, combining the health coaching. So I'd gone through the Real Meal Revolution to become a Banting coach, to sort of combine that with my personal training. Sorry, I missed that part of the story. And yeah, just in the end, I decided no, the health coaching was really where I could make a difference. To me, exercise is amazing for overall well-being, but, you know, most of the people come to me to lose weight, and I could see that I could help them more if I could help them really change the way that they ate. And, you know, doing that was about not just information, but helping them, you know, with their mindset around, you know, change, because that's often really hard. And so that kind of I've been sitting in that space now for about 4 years, and you know, work by myself. I just, you know, I love relationships, and I've met some incredible people in the space, you know, like you doing the podcast. I started one about 2.5 years ago because I wanted to meet more people. I felt like I was kind of, you know, doing this by myself, and I sort of plucked up the courage to approach people that I had you know, sort of heard about or come into contact with. And, you know, people are so happy to share their story. They really are. You know, it's just fantastic to make those connections with people. And that's
people
a nutshell.
People really are very generous, and I'm thrilled to share your story and give you a chance to tell your story, because you're always telling everybody else's story.
It's nice telling everybody else's.
It's good to get a chance to share your story as well. And our journeys parallel each other in a lot of ways. I've got 4 kids, 3 boys and a girl, and started studying extramurally when my children were quite young, and have studied ever since. They've always had a mum with her head in a book. And I got first very interested in the exercise and set up a gym and had staff and all sorts of things. And then I realised, of course, the nutrition had to be part of it. And then I wanted to understand more about the nutrition. So that's when I got involved in learning about nutritional biochemistry, and then into the functional medicine. But my foray into understanding more about metabolic syndrome and glucose and insulin was when I'd gone to Melbourne to do a course on secondary prevention and cardiac, and heart health secondary prevention with the Heart Research Foundation. And so I was in the middle of studying with Otago, looking at biochemistry, and we were just taught, you know, lots of fruits and vegetables, not too much meat, low fat. And I can still remember being there with the diabetic nurse talking about insulin, and I'm like, that can't be right. And I can remember question, and she said, yeah, as if like, well, what on earth, don't you know this? And so I went away, and then that is when, it's been over 20 years now, 23 or 24 years now that I've been. So I was one of the early people in the space, and it's been a hell of a time over those last 20 years trying to get this message out. And it's fantastic now because we've got Professor Noakes, and we have all these people around the world with all these credentials now saying, how could we ever have got this so wrong, you know?
Yeah, it's amazing, even in the last 5 years, how much has changed. I can't imagine what you've seen in your time and how it's changed. Like, just my ex-husband I mentioned was a doctor, and he's actually a sports medicine doctor. He works in Melbourne too. He knows Peter Bruckner, but he's not in the low carb space. But he's intrigued, you know, like he will, you know, he kind of gets it. But, you know, he went to, so pre-COVID, so that must have been, I think the last conference I went to was on the Gold Coast, Low Carb Down Under. I think it was 2019. So 2 years before that, there was in New Zealand, I think there was a doctor's like sports medicine conference summit. And I'm not sure if it was Peter or maybe it was Paul Mason or something. There was a few of the doctors got up and talked about low carb. And according to my ex-husband, he's like, you know, everyone's just going, yeah, right, you know. But then there was another one in 2019. And he said, you know, everyone's interested. Most people, you know, now at least are interested enough to see, you know, that there might be some sort of sense behind it. And that's only in the last 3 years. So, you know,
I've always said that as soon as we get some medical professionals backing this, we will see change. And so for all those initial years for me, it was a real struggle because the medical profession were just absolutely anti, you know, and very resistant. And in New Zealand, they still are. They're really, really resistant, and they don't really understand things like glucose and insulin and homocysteine, and they don't really understand how all those markers all come together, and, you know, CRP, and how all your general chemistry comes together to give you this big picture of what's actually going on in the body. And they just dismiss it. They just look at individual markers. But I did always feel that as soon as we got some credible medical professionals in the space, things would change. And now we're seeing dramatic changes now, and it will filter down to New Zealand eventually.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because our dietary guidelines are just coming up for review, thanks to James Mukey being Australian of the Year and doing the work he did for the last, you know, over 2020 was amazing. Not as much as I think he could have if it had been a normal year, because a lot of the speakers, like all the conferences he was going to speak at, they became COVID focused. And, you know, I'd said to him when he talked to me on my podcast, you know, ironic really, isn't it? Because of course the number one barrier or protection against COVID is diet and health and our immune system. Anyway, so he's done a great job, and he's actually got the review on the table. So that's out there, and a lot of people have submitted stuff to it. But of course, then, you know, beautiful Nina Teicholz and all the hard work they did in the US trying to get the 2019. Was it 2019 or 2020? Yeah. Well, she just posted today that they actually dismissed and took out all the data relating to low carb diets. It wasn't even part, you know, they took it away. And, you know, and she says there's actually more data now on this than any other diet of its effectiveness. So it's
when you look at what Buddha Health have been publishing, I mean, they have just been publishing amazing, like such good data.
Yeah,
you know.
Such good data.
And I think the frustrating thing for us is that we understand that the data has come from epidemiology, and the issues around that kind of research and that association isn't causation. And, you know, this focus on plant-based diets, getting rid of red meat, for example. And, you know, they look at relative risks that are so tiny that shouldn't even be making headlines. It's incredibly frustrating. And, you know, in New Zealand, the New Zealand Heart Foundation last year published a new paper about reducing red meat out of our diet. And so I went back and looked at all the papers they had reviewed, and they reviewed 33 papers. 5 of them were randomized controlled trials that looked at red meat in the diet. And then there was a 6th paper that wasn't a randomized controlled trial. So they had 6 papers out of 33 that looked at red meat. Those 5 randomized controlled trials, no, they weren't. They were what do you call it, meta-analysis of, sorry, they weren't randomized controlled trials, they were meta-analysis of all the meat data. And they came up saying there was no evidence that red meat is implicated in heart disease at all. So that's basically what they came up with. But then our Heart Foundation then pulls on papers about the environment and, all this other stuff, which they then say, well, we've got to care about that as well as worry about our health. And I really question that. Like, shouldn't our health come first and then we figure out how we're going to grow meat and protect the environment? I don't know. Anyway, sorry, I'm starting to ramble now.
No, not at all. No, but it's such a fascinating question because people lump, what we eat with how much we care about animals and the environment. I mean, it has suited the agenda of the plant-based agenda and the climate change agenda to join forces, to really help push it. And Dr. Peter Ballestead, I recently, I've learnt so much from him around, the fact that, obviously cows really aren't the problem. It's amazing how a lot of their cities have had beautiful skylines, over COVID because of no planes and very little cars and all the stuff that an industry, it's convenient, of course, to blame the cows because it suits other agendas. But yeah, look, I can't remember where I was going with that, but there's so much more to the story than we're told, and I think as a human being, and this is part of what I see as my job as a health coach, is to help people become free thinkers and to look beyond, that first response or that first headline or that, just look a little deeper. You don't have to look very far to find, more information to base your decisions on. And it's just not fair to tie in, because I'm now a carnivore. That's the last bit of my health story of the last year I haven't spoken about yet. But, and I care about the planet and I care about animals. But because I eat meat, does that make me a bad person? Well, I don't think it does. I think, it's just pretty easy to sort of go down those paths, but we've got to look beyond the dogma and that sort of top conversation to a little bit deeper. And you talked about the health of the individual. Well, Peter Ballestead says the number one thing we need to focus on is the metabolic health of the planet. If we don't have healthy individuals, the planet doesn't matter because we won't be around as a species. The planet's taken care of itself for a very, very long time. If we don't start taking care of ourselves, really, nothing else does matter. So
would you like to share a bit of your story the last year?
Yeah. So about May, June last year, I noticed that I had started to not sleep as well, and I was feeling like I was getting a few hot flushes, and I started to think, maybe I'm going through menopause. So I had been very interested in, have you read the book Estrogen Matters by Carol Tavris? Well, I'd come across that listening to one of Dr. Peter Attia's podcasts because it was all about how, we've been fooled with HRT like we have with the high carb, low fat rubbish. So I was very intrigued with that and bought the book and, had been, I guess in the back of my mind, I'm very much that if I need hormone, HRT, I'm going to have it. I'm not going to put up with the symptoms of menopause if I don't have to. Anyway, so I went to get my bloods checked, and I actually did go to a functional doctor because I wanted to make sure I would, got everything checked. And well, it came back that my hormone levels were fine for menopause, but that she picked up I had Hashimoto's. So, so I was a bit surprised, I guess, because I really didn't have, apart from those symptoms, I really didn't have a huge amount of symptoms.
Were you feeling the cold and had you started gaining weight? You hadn't
the
weight
was interesting. So I lost, so I kind of went low carb before I got pregnant with my 5th child. I didn't I stayed eating that most of the time through my pregnancy, had him, and he actually breastfed for 19 months. And I found that I didn't lose any weight until I stopped breastfeeding. As soon as I stopped breastfeeding, everything came off. So really over 18 months, I think I lost about 15, 16 kilos and got down to, my happy weight. I was really quite fine. I felt good. But what I realized had happened is over the last maybe year, prior to this time last year, my stomach had just been, it was constantly bloated, I guess. And, I think I just put it down to having had 5 children. Everyone sort of said, oh, you've had 5 children, you're not going to have a flat stomach, blah, blah, blah. And not that I wanted a flat stomach, but I just it didn't feel
right.
Right. Yes. But, and because I'm in this space, I've been intrigued about carnivore, but now I was just watching from over here. Keto was my thing. I'm fine with that low carb keto and, that was fine. But then, as soon as I kind of got the diagnosis, hindsight's a wonderful thing. And, I realized, of course, my mother has Hashimoto's, my grandmother had autoimmune. I had an autoimmune reaction. I had reactive arthritis in my early 20s. I got really sick and, I have HLA-B27, which is the gene that, so I think I just hadn't really, it just hadn't come into my awareness. But once I got that, I did. And I started working with a couple of people. So I didn't stay with my functional medicine doctor because she wanted me to eat the rainbow. And I knew enough about it that I wasn't going to eat the rainbow.
Yeah.
So I went back to Dr. Z for management, but I also spoke to Jessica Turton, who's a dietitian in Sydney, who I really respect. And I also got in contact with a lady called Michelle Doka, who's a a naturopathic doctor. And I'd built a relationship with her. She did a talk in the summit last year that I put on, and her whole focus is autoimmune. So I sent her my bloods and just said, what do you think? She said, yeah, Hashimoto's. She said, look, I'm happy to help you if you want to, I was like, okay. So I'm still actually working with her. And I went carnivore. So that was it. That was all I needed to go, yep, I'm going to do this. As I said, it's funny. We look for a while, we sit on the edges, and that's what I understand. Change takes time. I intellectually got it, but I kind of was like, oh, now why would I want to do that? But, I've got a family, I can't just sit there and eat a steak, and all these little conversations that I told myself. But it was kind of like, well, now I had a reason. So, yep, I'm going to do it. And I went pretty strict for about 6 months. And now I'd say I'm 90%, I have a few, I'm not strict, I have a family, I enjoy baked treats every now and again, like low carb ones and, berries, and I don't miss veggies, I always forced them into me because I thought they were healthy, but so I don't miss them. It was quite easy to go, great, don't have to worry about those. But I did really miss dairy because she wanted me to take dairy out, which is apparently quite problematic for autoimmune. That was quite hard, and it was really the cream in my coffee. I love cream, and the cheese was fine, but I loved yogurt, and it was funny when you have to take something out, you realize how much you do actually consume of, all the butter and the cheese and everything was, because there's a lot in the low carb, plus all the almond meal and nuts and stuff.
Yeah.
I took all that out. And, the first month was pretty horrendous, I have to say. I'll be very honest. On my guts, I really couldn't believe it. I didn't think I had a huge amount to change with my diet, but it must have been a lot more than I thought. So I was actually quite relieved it was lockdown because I needed to be near the toilet some days. I'm like, Michelle, what's going on? She goes, it's normal. Don't worry about it. It's your gut healing. It's doing what it needs to do. And like, holy moly. But that kind of righted itself after about a month. And, you know, she did give me some, you know, sort of nurturing stuff for my guts as well. And, but yeah, I just sort of stayed that way, and I loved it. I really enjoyed it after I'd overcome the kind of, you know, the
And
early
what's
stages.
happened with your Hashimoto's? Is that?
Yes. So, well, incidentally, I lost 10 centimeters off my gut. So I'll just put that out there now. So what I had put down to babies was actually bloating completely. And look, it's probably gone up a little bit again because I've, you know, as I said, I'm not 100%, and I don't want to be 100. If I don't have to be 100% for my health, I'm happy to have, you know, a bit of leeway. But it's still a lot better than it was. And I feel, you know, I don't have that same feeling, and I sleep well. I don't have any hot flushes, you know, everything's fine. So with my, I had one blood test. So I had my first one, that was in like May. I got the diagnosis. I had another one in December, and everything had started to normalize.
So what was your TSH with your first one? Can't remember.
I know I should have. I've got it. I've talked about it on my YouTube channel. I'll share it with you, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. But my antibodies, they weren't really high. Look, they were kind of, I think one of them was like 100 and the other one was I can't remember.
It's still high though.
Well, it's high enough, right? And they hadn't started to turn around yet.
Right.
So that's what I'm hoping. I'm going to go probably soon, maybe in the next month, and get another one and just see where they're at. So, but I had
the problem with those antibodies, of course, is that any gluten at all will trigger them.
That's right. You know, the interesting thing though, so I went out, like I had my Dr. Z, he's just great. I love him. He's awesome. But he said to me, look, I want you to go and just see an endocrinologist. He goes, just, you know, not for food or anything, just because I want to make sure I'm not missing anything, you know, someone that sees thyroids all the time, blah, blah. And it's okay. So I went and saw one. And basically the long and the short of it was, he told me I'm completely healthy. I have no autoimmune. I would never get my antibodies checked again. Food has nothing to do. Nothing. You're very healthy. You're fine. Basically, don't worry about it. Oh, what?
And you know, how many times do you and I hear this story every single day, Tracey? We have women and men come to us who say, how can I feel so shitty when my blood tests say I'm in perfect health and my doctor says there's nothing wrong and he wants to prescribe me an antidepressant because he thinks I'm depressed?
I know. So often, so much. It's just epidemic proportions, that sort of stuff. I mean, and women particularly, I mean, I mainly work with women. I do work with some men, but most of my clients are women. And, you know, I would say 9 out of 10, that is the story of the women sitting in front of me. You know, it's, very sad because they don't know. And, you know, like I don't blame them, you know, it's their choice as to what they want to see. I think, you know, as I said, I kind of empower my clients to just keep looking, you know, don't accept that. You're not going to change that doctor. It's interesting how a lot of them, they feel obligated to stay with them. So we've got no obligation to stay with anyone. You know, there's plenty of other doctors that will listen and explore other options. You know, I think until medicine changes at a fundamental level, that's what we have to do. We have to take control and decide that it's just being told, well, it's all in your head. No, that's not really good enough.
So as a health coach, I'd really like to touch on a little bit about how you work with people. To me, it seems like there's two sides. We have the nutrition side, and to be honest, most people know roughly what good food and not so good food is. So everyone knows that eating hot chips and burgers and all that stuff isn't good for their health. So we have that side of it. But then we have this challenge about making change and getting rid of that stuff. And we sort of have this story, and it's a story that I hear all the time, as I get up in the morning and I've made a decision and this is it, and this is my year, and I'm going to eat clean now. And then by the time people get home from work, they're overwhelmed, they've had a bad day, and they're saying, well, I haven't eaten anything bad all day, I actually deserved this. And then we set up this cycle of self-abuse. Okay, now I hate myself because I can't even keep a promise to myself. And this goes on.
Yep.
Do you want to talk a bit about that? I'm sure that that's a familiar story for you as well.
It is a familiar story, and I was very stumped on how to deal with it when I first started health coaching, because I don't think you really, I certainly didn't really come across anything that helped me in my study. I had to find this myself. And I guess this kind of paralleled with me with my own, like I had a bit of habitual drinking and emotional eating. I've been an emotional eater my whole life. And, you know, for a lot of my life as well, adult life, I would drink at 5 o'clock, you know, up until, you know, that kind of got to a bottle of wine at some nights. You know how I was talking about this today in my support group, you know, it's very easy to see in others. And as a coach, I can, you know, I see in others, but you got to see it in yourself as well. I mean, that's it is definitely the challenging part. So as I was kind of exploring things with my clients, I was definitely sort of exploring things in myself as well. And I came across an understanding, it's called the 3 principles, but it doesn't really matter what it's called. But I found a psychologist who was a recovering binge eater. And she was teaching this understanding of where change really happens. She was showing people that it had nothing to do with willpower. And your example at the start just shows exactly that. It has nothing to do with willpower, yet we think that it's all about discipline to bring about change. So basically, I was very intrigued by this and kind of just kept learning and listening to others who were teaching this way as well. And I'd say to my clients, look, I'm not sure if this is going to help, but I've come across something. I want to share it with you. You know, are you interested enough to be a little curious and learn as I learn? And of course, yes, I'd love to. And, you know, I basically just did that. As I saw things, as I had insight around change actually worked, I'd share it with my clients and they'd have insights as well. And, you know, what looked like something that was on us, you know, really, really hard to do, it just shifted. It looked different. Mm-hmm. So for me, I guess I can share my story around how I saw that I didn't need to drink every night and how I stopped eating emotionally, was that I started to see that our thinking drives behavior, that it doesn't work in any other way. So what we think leads to what we do. So fundamentally, change has to come by changing what we think. Mm-hmm. And a lot of our behavior is driven by habitual thought. So it's just thought that keeps coming up because that's what our brain does. It just spits out what we put in. And so for me, at 5 o'clock, there was that urge to have a drink. It's 5 o'clock. You've had a hard day. The kids are crappy. You're tired. You're home on your own. You know, whatever it was, I told myself, blah, 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 blah. And I believed it. So I'm just like, I'm going to have that drink. So I started to see that I started to understand how thought worked and how habitual thought worked and how the brain worked. And I actually started to see that I had a choice. So I didn't know I had a choice. No one had ever told me that I could choose what I focused on, that I could say, no, I don't want that thought. I'm going to wait for another one. Now, when it becomes a habit, like, you know, for me, almost 10 years of drinking every night, it's a very uncomfortable thought. It's an urge because it's driven by our biology. Our brain is, you know, that's what it does, keeps us doing the same thing. So, you know, it felt very, very uncomfortable. But also part of that is saying, well, we're feeling our thinking, so we don't need to fear it, and it will pass. So we have such a fear of discomfort. And if we get in these feelings, this is when we reach out for things outside of ourselves, for comfort, to fix it, to end it, because we don't like it. And, you know, I don't like it. Doesn't mean, you know, I'm not saying that you'll ever get comfortable with it, but it's really about changing your relationship with it. And if you don't do that, change is virtually impossible. So people that do shift, you know, that's what happens. If they do change, it comes from having insight, and comes from creating space beyond the habitual thinking to see something new, and to see that, you know, a habit is like the backseat driver. It's like that thing in the back, like, you know, from our lizard brain saying, Tracey, you deserve it. Start Monday. You're hopeless. You're weak. You know, whatever it is that, you know, everyone has their own, everybody. So instead of thinking that, you know, we have to listen to that and follow that around, you know, we have to, you know, visualize, well, I'm actually sitting in the front seat of my car. I'm in the driver's seat. So that backseat driver can boss me around, can tell me what to do, but ultimately my hands are on the wheel and my foot's on the accelerator and the brake. So it'll tell me that I can go and get that bottle of wine and pour it into a glass, but ultimately I'm the one that decides to do it or not. So that's kind of, you know, that was huge. And I read this book. I don't know if you've heard a book, because I had a couple of clients who had struggled with binge eating, you know, and I think that's why I was so interested in this. I mean, it's taken me around this huge journey of learning, but I read this book called Brain Over Binge. Oh, yes. I'm not sure if you've heard it. Yeah. I mean, I think that was kind of the first you know, step into this, but just understanding, you know, if we don't understand something, we're tricked by it all the time, you know, so simply kind of understanding it. And it's not saying that, you know, it's really important. This is what I say to my clients. It's not saying that these things are going to come up. Like I get asked a lot, you know, when am I going to not get sugar cravings? When am I going to not crave the chocolate? Or I don't know, maybe never. What if it's with you forever? But so what? Because remember, we can change our relationship with that. We can see what it is, know where it's coming from. And when we're ready, we can start to see it differently. And it's no judgment. There's no right or wrong. You know, I think understanding this has just allowed me to show, you know, I have so much compassion. I just show, you know, nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
But it's really allowed me to see that my job as a coach fundamentally is to show my clients what I see in them, you know, that they can do it. They can be, they are, you know, amazing. And I think, you know, the fact that we're born with this innate resilience. We are born with these innate gifts. You know, we're not, you know, you're just not the one that doesn't have it. We've all got it, but we've also got this amazing brain. That is amazing, but it kind of tells us stuff that's not very helpful sometimes. And, you know,
and it's like there's a pattern to it, as you said. You know, you have a feeling, which leads to a thought, which leads to a belief, and then we go searching for the evidence to prove that that we were right.
Always.
And then we get on the next spiral, and then that triggers the thought, and then we just keep on the spiral, or keep on this loop. And I think I love what you're saying, because that's what I talk to my clients about, is it doesn't matter that you have these thoughts and feelings and beliefs and that you have these cravings. It's about you saying, I choose. And if you come home and you have that craving and you decide you want that glass of wine and you pour it, and then you sit there and you go, I own this, I choose, I am going to drink this now. And when you choose that you're going to drink it, then you've got two choices. You choose all that emotional backwash that you get about feeling helpless and useless and what's wrong with me, or you choose that, okay, well, I chose to drink this, so now I'm going to move on and there's another day tomorrow as well, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there's no real right or wrong, but it's just, I think, being in the moment that when you pick it up, you're going, I'm choosing to put this in my mouth.
Absolutely. I mean, what we tell ourselves has a huge impact on our health. And I don't think people realize that, you know, like the feeling that we're living in is creating, it's doing things in our body. Of course, we know, with the stress response and things like that. And I think, a lot of people are walking around with this low level anxiety and stress within them. Now that is affecting our health, but what people don't see, or well, I didn't see it until someone told me, is that we have a choice around that, that it's all part of understanding, and this was a big part of my journey in the last year with really understanding self-care, because Hashimoto's, a lot of people, people who suffer from it also have a feeling of no voice, like don't have a voice to speak, no confidence. And that's come very much from my background. So there was a lot of stuff I really looked at in terms of, well, self-care isn't bubble baths and, a night out with the girlfriends. Self-care is actually knowing that I'm responsible for my health and my happiness and my financial life and my well-being, and I can't control anyone around me to bring me those things. Like codependency was what I've really looked at. I've come from a family where I had an addicted brother. My mother's father was an alcoholic. These kind of things where we look to others, or we want to control everyone around us because we, in terms of our feelings and what I then see. So everyone, I think, has a degree of codependency. I just don't think we can not have that in the world. But again, is how much do we see of it? How much does it matter in our life? And when we feel that we can't control the people around us, do we then look for the panacea? Is it, and, obviously in my world, that's eating, that's where I see women pretend, as I said, I mostly work with women, but leaning to food or alcohol or whatever to fix that feeling.
I think you've hit on a few really good points there. Initially when you were talking about self-care, and so self-care means a little bit of doing some work as well.
Like it is a bit, yeah.
So there's always a little bit of hard work about self-care. But then I really liked what you were talking about that, loss of control, and how many women have that sense of loss of control. How do you work with women like that, and how do you help them, and how do you teach them the things that you've learned, or how do you guide them to being curious about those things, and then seeing that they can actually apply it to themselves rather than throwing their hands up and going, it's all too hard for me, I can't do it?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I guess, none of this stuff changes overnight. I mean, it's really about continually looking in a direction that's different to where you've been looking at. As I said, historically, if we're looking outside of ourselves for change, we're looking in the wrong way, in the wrong place. So it starts by, looking within. And I think fundamentally, the first thing I do is teach people that, particularly the women I sit in front of, that they're not broken, that we are mostly human, but we're all human beings having a human experience, and no one's perfect, and we'll have ups and we'll have downs. And, again, most of what we think we need to do is come from, you touched on it before, thought systems, this belief systems of what we think we should be in the world, and who we think we should be, what sort of mother, what sort of wife, what sort of whatever. We make up this stuff, and then we compare ourselves to this made up, I don't know, thing.
Ideal.
Yeah. And then when we don't reach it, which most of us don't, because it's ideal, and not human and not real world, then we show ourselves no compassion, and we come really hard, completely hard on ourselves. So the first thing is I get my clients to try and see that where they are right now is absolutely perfect, because where they are right now is because of every decision they've made to that point. And every decision we always make is the best decision we see to make in that moment. It doesn't mean it's the best decision for for our health, but that is what we see to do, and that's what we're driven to do until we see we can make other decisions. So people talk a lot about please come to me. I can't think of it, but basically it'll come to me. But I really want to get that word self-sabotage. That again, which to me, I don't believe in self-sabotage, because when you understand how we work as human beings and understand that, we're always driven to operate from our thinking, really, and we're always driven to feel better, right? So really self-sabotage is just a misguided attempt at self-love. It's misguided, but it's innocent. We're not trying, no one tries to derail themselves. It's just that's all they see to do, and the alternatives they haven't either seen or they don't want to see them because they think it's too hard. So that's kind of the bigger picture. I get women to see that, they're not flawed, they're not broken, they're just a human being. And then we start with, obviously it's very individual with where they're at, but I'm just understanding those principles of thought and thought systems, and changes feels uncomfortable. So what? Why do we fear that? We don't have to fear that. We can sit in an uncomfortable feeling. Like you and I talked about doing these podcasts. We can still feel uncomfortable and still do it. Like we let our feelings drive us around, instead of seeing that again, like we just have choice, and it's okay, because we're okay. Like we just are part of this amazing operating system that has gifted us with this wisdom and intuition, and really fundamentally we always know what to do. You said at the start, everyone knows how to eat right. Of course they do. I don't help anyone with food. I really don't. It's all about seeing that. Why, and I'm curious, like I encourage my clients to get very curious with what they don't know, instead of fearing it. Why does that work? Why do you think I'm interested in that? Like I'm just, I think having that kind of curious, and I was never like that. So don't, this is what I love to say to people is my free mind or big curious mind is really only a product of the last 3 years of my life. And I'm nearly 48. I never had a mind like that. I was just driven by habitual thought and habitual reaction, and jealousy and insecurity, and I just didn't know that I could choose how I lived my life, I guess. And that it starts really with freeing here.
And then that just gives you such a powerful amount of freedom and control, and then you don't need to worry about what you're eating. Just becomes a byproduct of that, because
100%,
you eat it or you don't eat it, it doesn't really matter. It's no longer one of those pain points where you're sitting there feeling that you're in pain because you couldn't eat something. And I have clients who tell me that they feel real pain, like I can't eat that piece of chocolate cake or carrot cake or something, and I feel real pain that I can't eat that.
Yeah, it's interesting that whole concept, and I feel absolutely, I completely understand that, and I think there's so much we can see around that too. Why can't you eat it? We make up all these rules. I mean, yes, obviously people that see you and people that come to me, they want to lose weight, they want to reverse their type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance. Logically, it doesn't make sense to eat the cake every day. But at the end of the day, nobody is responsible for the choices other than you. And when you're feeling empowered, it's like, well, when you understand that, it's just, you don't even think about it, stuff that chocolate, things that look to me like I could never, ever live without. It took me a long time to live without them. But, I did, and I finally saw that I could have them there, but I can take them or leave. It's up to me, And sometimes when you are in a good feeling, so we talk about it like state of mind, when you've got a good state of mind, you're in a good feeling, that stuff's easy. But it's at the end of the day, when you're stressed and you're tired and all these other factors, and that's when, if you're relying on willpower, it'll just be virtually impossible.
Yeah, it's interesting. I liked what you said about the chocolate there. I find it quite fascinating because, I always enjoy a glass of wine, and I've always loved chocolate, loved my piece of chocolate. And then all of a sudden I noticed that, and it's not even I'm not even consciously choosing it. It's just, I don't even buy chocolate, and friends will say, would you like a piece of chocolate? And I'm like, oh, actually, I don't really feel like it right now. And it's definitely not conscious. It's just some sort of shift inside of you, and that habitual glass of wine at night, and you're like, well, actually, I don't even need it. I don't even really want it. It's just a habit. It's quite interesting.
It is very interesting, but I obviously I sit mostly in the health space, but this has changed the way I parent completely, the way I parent as well, and the relationship I have with my now husband. It's not, I have no expectation on him for my happiness. But my first husband, that was his fault. And he didn't make me happy, so that was his fault. So there's always more to see, but I've lost my train of thought. There you go, it's gone. But it doesn't matter.
It's all fantastic anyway. It's all great stuff. So what other things do you see? What other common things do you see that women come to you with, or have we covered most of them?
I think, we've kind of covered most of them. I think, now I'm kind of known in the space as someone that, I guess can help people. Most of my clients are people that have been trying to do this, trying to get it right. I rarely have someone that doesn't have any understanding of the low carb. I think, there's certainly a lot of issues around support from family. I see a lot of women whose husbands don't support what they do, or, struggle with trying to feed them and their children. And that's what I was going to say. And this is relevant. They have a whole lot of thinking and ideas around how things should look around food. And, what I was going to say before is that what I've seen is when we have a whole lot of thinking about anything, it's really hard to work it out. We go in here and we like, oh, I've got to figure it out. What am I doing wrong? Or I've got to learn this, or I've got to learn that, or I've got to go to that person. That person's got to give me motivation. I'm not getting enough of, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But what I've seen is when we can actually quieten a lot of that down and stop thinking about it so much, then we'll get insight and we'll get an idea of how we can do it. And, like I don't tell anyone what to do. I don't tell my clients what to do, nothing, but I help them to see ways to access, their own wisdom to figure it out. And I'll tell you a classic example was I was having a discussion in my support group about exercise, because I still love exercise, not for weight loss, but just for well-being and, for muscles. And, we were just having a discussion around how to fit it in. Because I get it. If you work full time, you've got kids, it's hard to work it out. And, nobody wants to get up. Not everybody wants to get up at 4 a.m. and go for whatever. Anyway. And so we were talking about exercise, and one of the ladies sort of said, oh, well, I don't know when I'm going to do it because I'm not a morning person. And I just said to her, well, how do you know you're not a morning person? How do you know that? And just that simple question, she was like, what do you mean? So that just stopped her in her tracks. And, she started to, she didn't say anything much for about a week in the group. And then she writes into the group about a week later. She said, you won't believe it, but I got up at 6 a.m. and I have for the last 2 or 3 mornings. And I've realized I love it. And maybe I am a morning person.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just brilliant. It's one of my favorites because it's just, that's it. There was no willpower.
Our self-limiting beliefs, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's like, a doctor actually, I had a doctor saying to me, I can't do a presentation because I'm doing another summit. No, I'm a bit nervous about doing it. I'm an introvert. I can't do it. And I just said, so tell me about this introvert. How do you know? I think, we love to categorize and label and put frames around things, but I just think that just limits us, and that just keeps us really from tapping into our true potential. And I think everybody has the potential to have and be and do whatever it is they want to do when they realize that the only thing getting in their way is probably a whole lot of limiting beliefs.
And limiting beliefs that we've accumulated on our whole life, and we just hang on to so rigidly as
100%.
if they were real.
Yes.
And even if they are real, let's say they are real, how does it serve us to still keep hanging on to them now when we know how negative the impact of holding on to them has been,
Absolutely. I know it's fascinating. There's a lot of people get very offended, by what other people say. And, you see it all the time on social media. And I've got this great post I wrote. Great post. It's probably not great, but it really was helpful to me around understanding thought systems. And when you understand thought systems and what makes up someone's, so yours is different to mine because it's accumulation of all your experiences in your life, and that's vastly different to mine. And our brain, as you said in the beginning, is going to do everything to try and make us stay in that belief, whatever it is that we believe. That's why people, rarely change religions or rarely change support, politics.
Exactly.
We stay with that until something jolts us out of it, or we understand what's going on. And, when we see that everyone, like 7.8 billion people or whatever, have got a very different thought systems, well, why wouldn't we expect everyone to disagree? But so what? That's not personal. That's about my thought system, what I think. It's not about yours. So we don't need to take it personally if someone disagrees with us.
I do wonder if there's a little bit of a social aspect to that, that need to belong to a group. Tribe. And that safety.
Absolutely.
Safety aspect. And so we don't want to step out of the group's boundaries and we defend them,
We do. But again, that's our evolution. I was just reading something with my husband the other day. I mean, we are no different to cavemen. Our brain hasn't evolved at all. Not at all. So again, that's what, that's what our brain does.
Smaller. on our modern diet, our brain size has actually shrunk
already
over the last 10 or 12,000 years. Yeah,
isn't that
started
amazing?
With the Egyptians eating all that grain that they used to eat.
Yeah.
So that's a fact. Yes, our brain size has actually shrunk. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, well, I was just saying that it does what it does, for our survival. We're inbuilt with this stuff, but that's not the environment we live in now. I mean, we're not going to be killed if we step outside the tribe or disagree, and I think for us we're such a global community now. And if we're going to see beyond difference and accept people that look or think differently to what we do, we have to understand what's stopping us from doing that. It's a big thing. I love this stuff, obviously.
I know. It's absolutely fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
So you want to tell us a little bit about where people can find you and what you do? You've got some great online courses. You have a podcast. You've got the summit coming up, which it will be an absolute pleasure to help get that out there to fellow Kiwis to join up and come and have a listen. So if you just wanted to share a little bit about your work and
everything really I do is found on my website. So I do have a couple of online programs. I've got one that I created last year, which is 30 Days to Low Carb Your Way. It's really about the mind and the body. So it's so much more than 30 days. The women that have done it have, taken months, which is fine. It's just really about, it's something you can come back to or look and see what it is that you really want for now and need for now. But I talk about things, like the habit change, understanding all of that. Motivation, that's another big one I talk about. That's a myth, because motivation is just a thought, but it's only temporary, with something far deeper that we can tap into, for change. And my support group I love. So that's just people, I'm just with them on Facebook, and there's a back end system where I upload resources and reading and, stuff. But my podcast and the summit. So last year I organised the Low Carb Lifestyle Long Weekend, and its focus is on women's health. Last year there was only female speakers, but this year we've got a few male speakers. I'm very passionate about highlighting what amazing work people are doing in the space, but also really having a platform for women's health, because I think historically a lot of medical data has focused on men. And I really, I think the more I'm in the space, the more I see there are differences. I think we're all human beings. I think we all want the same thing, but in terms of our health, sometimes, with the female hormones, it's a little bit different. And, we can, do things differently, and we tend to think things through a lot. So
I always say women aren't just small men, and it's nutritionally, emotionally, exercise, it's all different for us. Yeah.
Actually, one of the funniest presentations of last year, one of my, I'm very close to Dr. Jackie Montefiore, who's a GP in Brisbane. We actually ran a group together for about a year. So, she was the doctor and I was the health coach. It was all online. It was fantastic, but she went and had another baby. How rude. But she did a presentation last year on cholesterol. No, not cholesterol, sorry, on women and heart disease. And one of the first things she says is, well, women are not just men without a penis. And I'm like, right, I'm listening to this.
Exactly. Yeah, beautiful. Well said.
So my website, if you're interested in anything, I share I have a lot of free stuff on my website, because I just want people to see there's options and see possibilities. And, I've got the podcast, I have my YouTube channel. I've written up a lot of stuff around different things that we've talked about today. I've got a lot of blog posts if people are interested in exploring things. And I've talked about my Hashimoto's journey as well, resources.
And I think that's, Hashimoto's is so prevalent, and it's such a big issue for women, that I think that sharing that and hearing that story, it gives hope to women as well, that that there can be a solution, and they can reach out to you and talk to you about that further.
Yep.
And we'll put all the links to where to find you, so your LinkedIn links, Facebook, and your website.
Everything. I'm on Instagram. I started on Instagram first years ago as was called What to Feed 7. It was like what I was feeding my family, because it was all real food when I found low carb, and now it's
well that's another great question, because people say eating real food is too expensive, it's too hard, how do I feed my family? I mean, that's a great little question to sort of finish up on, really.
Yeah, look, I think if you think it's too hard, it's going to be too hard. Again, if we see beyond what we think and see new things, like I can do it. I've worked it out. Doesn't mean I'm perfect. I'm so not perfect. My kids have popcorn and chips and, party food when they go to parties, but I just have rules. I've just made decisions around what I have in the house. So I don't have certain things in the house. You know, obviously my teenagers, well, they've got to make their own choices. I can't control what they do outside the house. But overall, when they're here, they really well, plenty of animal protein. And I do my best. I don't feed my family grass-fed organic meat because I can't afford it. And I know that that's okay. I buy, you know, I have a big warehouse butcher down the road where I generally go once a week and buy up a whole lot of stuff in bulk that's cheaper. I freeze stuff. But look, you know, again, I value it. You know, it's what you value. I just can't know what I know and not feed my kids real food. I just couldn't do it. It would just go against, you know, everything. So much about, it would. And so, but I understand, you know, that not everybody's going to do that. And again, that's fine. But I think we have to see again that if we want to change what we see, it's up to us to do it.
I think that's a really great point. And I think mentioning, you know, neither of us and none of the people you interview and that I have on my podcast are standing out there saying, we're perfect, we've got this right, we know all the answers. What we're really saying is that we can see that there's a problem, there's a health crisis. It's all around the world. And the main component of that is the food that we're eating. And most of the problem about that is eating that processed food, that highly processed food. And if we could eliminate that, we could perhaps stop all our kids getting type 2 diabetes. It's just escalating. And then, you know, as a grandma, what worries me is the loss of potential.
I know, that's right.
You know, it's just frightening, the loss of potential of all these little kiddies who are not making those choices for themselves either, you know. And I think we have to talk with our feet. We have to stop buying this stuff, you know, because we blame the food manufacturers, and I'm terrible. I blame the government. I'm like, why doesn't the government do something about this? But at the end of the day, we're buying it. And if we stopped buying it, the food manufacturers would produce something different.
That's right.
They would change what they're producing to meet public demand. So,
yeah, I think, you know, we're just, again, it comes back to how we're created. You know, I truly believe that we are designed to do things with the least effort. You know, if you look back to our evolution, you know, we are designed not to move too much unless we had to, because we had to hunt maybe for 4 days to kill an animal. You know, like the more I live, the more I see that. And I just think that getting what we want probably is really going against our rewiring and just stopping believing so much what our head tells us. You know, like, I can't, well, how do you know you can't? And, you know, you might spend $50 on something that could have easily fed a family, you know, a roast with some veggies. And, you know, like, I don't spend money on certain things that, you know, I'm not putting any value on any or judgment on any of it, but I'm just saying there's always room. And unless you see the possibility within yourself, then nothing will change.
And then what's the cost of not doing it? You know, what's the cost of so many women being in bodies that they hate and lifestyles that they hate?
I know.
Being out of control of their choices, which they hate. The cost of that, you know, compared with making those changes, perhaps.
Yeah. I was watching a show. My husband and I love this house show, House Hunters. I don't know if you've seen it, but they had this lady on, and you know, she had 2 young kids, like a 5 and a 7-year-old. She was in her 40s, and her husband had just recently died. He was big man, had a heart attack, gone. You know, I watch that stuff and it breaks my heart because I know how preventable it is. And, you know, now those kids have got to grow up without a father. She's got no husband. And they've got to adjust to a life, you know, life without them when it wasn't necessary. You know, he didn't have to die of a heart attack. You know, I don't know. It just breaks my heart that, you know, and again, that's why I come back to my job is trying to get people to see beyond their thoughts. And that's that if they can do that, then we've got hope. And we've always got hope because we can always see beyond our thoughts. So.
Well, this has been absolutely amazing, Tracey. Thank you. And it's such a thrill to share you with my audience over here.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely. Yeah. Loved it.
Yeah, it's been really great. So we'll keep in touch anyway, and I'll send you a copy of this recording once we've got it up and downloaded, and you can share it with your people as well.
I will.
Fantastic.
Lovely.
Thanks,
Susan.